Hey there fellow creators, Ben here from Cinder Studios. When you go to the art store to pick up some paint, you might see a color that says cadmium red hue, or yellow hue, or Prussian blue hue. What does the word hue actually mean when we're talking about paint? Stick around. So when you see the word hue, what that refers to is a mix of pigments rather than a pure pigment color. And that particular mix of pigments is usually done to replicate a specific color or mimic the look of another one that is, one, historical, two, one is possibly more expensive like a cadmium, so a cadmium hue instead, or the third option is a color that is just a sort of new color. It's a new mix of colors that a certain paint company is going to add to their range of colors to give more options for artists. Now that said, let's talk a little bit about the differences between those hues and those pure pigments and what the different properties are between them. Single pigment colors have a usually easier time mixing and sort of cleaner mixes. They actually don't really change between brand to brand. There's consistency in those color names for the most part, between switching, say, between Golden, between Liquitex, between M. Graham, between Winsor & Newton. All of those cadmium reds are going to pretty much be the same. However, it is noted that a lot of pure pigment colors tend to be a little bit more expensive. Again, not always the case, depends on sort of what series you're talking about, whether the color is more expensive or less expensive, but generally speaking, a pure pigment paint is going to be just a couple of dollars more. Now, while hue paints, generally speaking, can be cheaper than a pure pigment paint, there is not as much consistency in color mixing. The names between brands can change quite a bit because different brands are using different mixes of different colors to create that same color. And also hues in general have a way of mixing that is less accurate right out of the gate. It takes a little bit more practice and a little bit more experience in order to mix those colors the way you might expect them to. So a simple pure pigment red and a yellow is going to make a fairly pure orange, but you might have two different hues of the red and the yellow that may not mix the way you think they're going to. Now, from artist to artist, you're going to find that people have a lot of different feelings about hue colors. Some say you want to avoid them entirely, some totally embrace them. I think it's important to find a middle ground between the two, but also know why each artist does things differently. As usual, you have to try everything. You can't just right out of the gate swear off either a pure pigment or a hue without trying both to see what they can do. And mostly, whether you like them or hate them, hues really just are a personal preference. Whether you want them on your palette or not, it just depends on what colors you kind of work with, which ones you feel like you need, and which ones just you're more comfortable painting with. Me personally, at least for my acrylics, as well for I think for all of my colors, I use a mix of both. It depends on just what color I need. But of course, again, if you're switching between different brands, it is very important to note the difference in what color you're getting. So switching, for example, from a Golden Prussian blue hue to a Liquitex Prussian blue hue, their mixes are different. So if you're expecting that paint mix to mix the same way when switching between brands, it might not. So reading the back of your paint tube, which we talked about last week in the quick tip, is going to be really, really important. And one final note here, which I did mention at the beginning, not necessarily every hue paint is trying to mimic another color. You could have a brand that's just trying to make a color that seems new or different for artists. So for example, here's some Golden Earth. It's a Utrecht watercolor. It took me a second. And this is just a mix of colors. We also have a Williamsburg Courbet Green, high quality oil paint, another hue, but it doesn't say hue by it. Other part of this. It doesn't have to say hue to be a hue paint. It can just have a different name. Or Liquitex Muted Green. Not necessarily has to say hue, but it's still a mix of colors. The same kind of goes in reverse for pure pigments too. Some pure pigment colors have different names even between brands, so important again to read your paint tube, see what your pigments you're getting, and really kind of learn which colors you're getting from brand to brand. And not all hues aren't necessarily bad or terrible or great. There's just different preferences, but it's important to read your tube, not just the color name, but the pigments as well. So what about you guys? Do you use hue paints or do you swear them off entirely? If you don't know, has this video actually made you go back to your paint tubes and go, oh, what colors do I use? Or has this video opened up new doors for you to explore and experiment in new colors. Let me know your thoughts in comments below. And as always, hit that like button, helps the video out. Subscribe if you're not already. Share this video with your friends, family, and fellow artists. Check out my stuff in social links, description box below. And this has been from Cinderblock Geos, reminding you to keep on creating, and I'll see you guys next time. Got a little flubby there at the end.